Hello everyone, welcome to Manifest IAS. You're watching Current Jots. This is Manjunath, Polity Faculty at Manifest. Current Jots is a current affairs initiative which we started on April 1st, and as part of this initiative we'll be covering all significant current events that have transpired since June last year. We're not only giving free videos but also free PDFs of these videos are available for download, the links of which are posted in the comment and the description section. And also for timestamping of these videos, please see the description. As part of Polity Lecture series, in my last video I had raised the issue or done the issue of elections and electoral reforms. That was part 1. In this video I'm going to continue with the same theme. This constitutes part 2 of the same topic. Before knowing the subtopics, the most unique component which I time and again speak of in my every video about strategy talk, wherein I raise certain generic questions which boggle the minds of UPSC aspirants while preparation, because the method of studying is important. And I also asked you to ask any questions you have regarding your preparation, and one of the students who had been following our videos had asked a question in the comment section. His name is Varun. He had raised a question regarding how do I minimize negative marks. I thought this could help everybody in general, so I made it as part of this strategy talk. I'll be answering this question at the end, and also if you have any specific queries you can write to me. My mail ID is manjunath.manifestis@gmail.com. Now coming to the subtopics. With respect to electoral reforms, we had done many issues related to institutions, ECI, the political parties, and other issues related to voting and types of voting. Now when you look at the subtopics, you'll get an idea of the first few aspects are related to money and elections. Next is mostly related to criminalization of politics, 5, 6, 7. Later issues are related to EVM and other issues. And finally, these are technical or technological aspects, EVM, or even and also C-Vigil app, sweep, certain programs by Election Commission of India. So if you look at the categorization, I have classified them on a thematic basis. So when I do it when I classify in thematic on themes, it becomes easier to remember. That is one of the tricks of memorizing. So
subscribe now and press the bell icon. Never miss an update.
Coming to the first topic, electoral bonds, it is related to a broader topic called money and elections. Now, when you look at money and elections as a topic, you should be knowing at what level money works and how it affects how it negatively affects the democratic process. So first, in order to regulate at different levels, there are different provisions given in Representation of People Act to curb influence of money and undue influence of money. So first is with respect to candidates, what are the provisions made? RPA fixes a limit for candidates, and under Section 8A, every candidate has to file expenses with election agent in a separate account, and a true copy has to be submitted to the district election officer in states and returning officer in case it is a UT. So know the difference between the areas and the offices, and also this has to be done within 30 days of result. If it is not done, they are liable for disqualification. If you look at section 8 to 10 and 11 is all related to disqualifications. We'll be coming back to that again. And under this, Election Commission of India has the authority to disqualify. President does it on the recommendation of ECI. Now with respect to voters and money, now the first thing is with respect to candidates have there are other ways of regulating money with respect to candidates as well. One is filing expenses. Second is before they file nominations, they have to declare their assets and liabilities, and once they are elected also, they have to declare their assets and liabilities to the presiding officer as well in the house. So these are the three mechanisms. Next is voters and money. So bribing of voters is also is an offense, and it is considered as an offense under section 123(1) of RPA and section 171(b) of IPC. Now, there are two people or two parties involved in bribing. The person who gives bribe, that is the candidate, and the person who is getting bribed, that is the voter. Now, the offense from the side of the candidate, it is considered a cognizable offense, that is, you don't need a warrant and to arrest the person, and it is a non-bailable offense. So giving bribe is a non-bailable and a cognizable offense, but taking bribe as of now is an offense, but it is not non-cognizable. It is not non-bailable. So there is a demand by the Election Commission of India that getting bribed to vote should be made a cognizable offense. This point you have to remember. This is one of the recommendations or one of the proposals made by Election Commission of India in a list of 20 proposals. I made a mention of 20 proposals in my last video. Moving to the next idea, paid news. So first is related to candidates, second is related to voters, third is related to general expenditure. Paid news refer to advertising in the form of news. So RPA does not have any specific way to regulate paid news. There's no specific clause for it, but this is generally regulated through the candidate filing expenses. But it is difficult to track under Section 8A. So the Election Commission of India has made a proposal that there should be a separate clause under RPA made to tackle paid news. So what are the problems with paid news? So paid news goes against journalistic ethics, and it also goes against the democratic principles as well. That it negatively affects the free and fair conduct of elections. Next is with respect to the regulatory instruments under money in elections only. Parties is the next level at which money is regulated. There are many ways of regulating funding to parties. One of the newest way has been electoral bonds. Now, what are electoral bonds, etc.? That will be looking into. Section 29C, 29A I had said is registration of parties. 29C talks about that parties will be eligible for income tax exemption only if they declare their income. So anything which was any funding which was above 20,000 earlier should be declared in order to get income tax exemption, but now this has been reduced to 2,000, and anything above 2,000 comes through electoral bonds method. So earlier it was 20,000. In the budget it was reduced to 2,000 when the scheme of electoral bonds was introduced. That is one rule it makes sense. And second thing is, under Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, parties are not allowed to get funding from foreign companies. That is one thing. Next is under the section 77 of RPA clearly says what all comes under the expenditures of the party, and the maximum expenditure by a party, there is no specific rule in RPA. That has become one of the problem. There is a rule for candidates, but there is no rule for political parties under RPA. There is a rule under conduct of election rules. So there is a demand that it should be made part of RTA as part of the statutory framework and make it more powerful. Now, I said under FCRA no foreign funding, and second is, in order to get income tax exemption, they have to declare. Recently what has been done, and under company there is one more act which regulates funding to the political parties. So under FCRA, foreign companies cannot fund. Now, who can fund? Individuals in India can fund, organizations in India can fund, companies in India can fund. So companies in India who fund, they are regulated by Companies Act, and under which it says that earlier it was that 7.5% of the last 3 years profit was the limit to fund. But now this cap has been removed, and the 3 years cap also has been removed. And also the foreign company definition has been changed under FCRA. And so now it includes large number of companies under it to fund. So in fact or de facto, what has happened is any company can fund unlimited funding. It can give unlimited funding, even a shell company. So when the 3 years time period is removed, so a company just which has been open for the elections or keeping elections in mind, that also gets eligibility to fund. So this in a way has gone against the idea or the mandate of corruption, or the mandate of anti-corruption, or the plank of on which this government came to power. That was, it came on the plank of fighting against corruption. So electoral bonds gives you, electoral bonds also has been criticized heavily because it makes funding, whatever funding is done by the company, that unlimited funding is now very opaque, it is very obscure, it is not open to scrutiny. Now, what is electoral bonds? analysis you can keep it aside for mains, but more of the prelims fact what you should be knowing for electoral bonds. Electoral bonds is a scheme which has been brought under the budget. Under this scheme, any funding to the party above 2000 should, above rupees 2000 should go through the electoral bonds. Now when you know what is about, bond is an instrument to raise money. It's like a bearer instrument, like a promissory note. That promissory note refers to, I promise you to pay a certain amount of money, is a promissory note. Now it can be purchased by any citizen of India or body incorporated. It's that anyone, individual or an organization can fund the political parties. Now the bonds come in certain denominations. They come in rupees 1000 denomination, 10,000, 1 lakh, 10 crore, and 1 crore is the maximum of denomination of it. And where do you get these bonds? These bonds are available at specific branches of SBI. And who can, in order to buy them, in order to fund through this mode, the donor should be KYC, know your customer compliant account he or she should be having. And once the bond is bought by this person, and this has to be deposited in the bank where the party has its account, and the party should encash it within 15 days. That is, the validity of this bond once purchased is 15 days. So these are the points you should be remembering. Now, who are eligible, or which parties? Are all parties eligible? Only a certain parties are eligible. So registered parties, that is, if you remember, registered parties, I had made a list wherein what are the advantages of a registered party. So first, the party should be registered and it should secure at least 1% of the votes polled in the most recent Lok Sabha or state election. That is one thing. Second thing is, electoral bond transaction can be made only via this. So there is a specific account of the party. It can only be made through that account. And when will be the bonds available? The bonds will be available for purchase for a period of 10 days. In 10 days each in the beginning of every quarter, that is January, April, July and October. In case it is the year of elections, additional 30 days period will be specified by the central government in the year of Lok Sabha elections. The electoral bonds will not bear the name of the donor. So the party will not be knowing who the donor is. This is to protect the privacy of the donor, and also this is to prevent any kind of misuse and manipulation of votes and voting patterns in India by the party which is getting donations. The name at best will be, the name will be known only to the banks, not to the party. So this is the many criticism that this entire mechanism is governed by RBI. So if you see, if RBI is not independent, then the government will be getting the names of every person who has been donating. Through this, they can influence. And also there is no transparency in this, because name is only to a bank, and hijacking a bank is not so difficult a process in India. Those are the criticisms aside, they're not important for mains, but from prelims point, these are the facts you should be remembering. Next, so the only solution which has been prescribed, which has been the most effective solution to control money, influx of money and also corruption and black money in elections, is state funding of elections. And one committee has been a lot in news within the context of electoral bonds. Electoral bonds, it made waves. It was making waves, and many articles were being written in the context that BJP party or many leaders wanted secrecy and opacity. They demanded it. In that context, many articles were written, and there was one committee which was time and again mentioned, that is Indrajit Committee. Why was this in news? This was in news because Indrajit Committee in 1990 speaks of partial state funding of elections. So when they say partial state funding of elections, what were the recommendation made that you should be knowing? Sometimes they might ask the recommendations as a prelims question. So funding only to recognized parties, not to everyone. Funding in both kind and cash. When you say kind and cash, there could be support in terms of giving vehicles, helping in campaigning, etc. And the committee says that there should be an electoral fund separately constituted. It shall be called National Election Fund. So these are the recommendation of Indrajit Committee. There are many other committees which have been established, like Joint Parliamentary Committee, Tarkunde Committee, Indrajit Gupta Committee. Then there is Dinesh Goswami Committee, Bohra Committee in 1995. It speaks about criminal excess, criminalization of politics. Next is criminalization of politics. We have completed money and elections, and criminalization of politics basically refers to entry of criminals into politics. Now, this is regulated, or this is regulated or controlled or curbed again by RPA. Under RPA, there are specific sections: Section 8, 1, 8, 2, 8, 3, 8, 4, 8A, 9, 10, Section 11, all deal with collectively with the criminalization of politics. Now, this question had been asked in mains this time. They had asked what are the grounds on which disqualification occurs under RPA. When you look at disqualification can occur through constitutional provisions or can occur through RPA. So in that question, it was specifically asking RPA disqualifications. It was basically asking Section 8 to Section 11. Now, almost all sections are in news. 8.3 is particularly in news. 8.1, 8.2 and 8.4 are in news with respect to Supreme Court ruling. Now, if we look at certain sections, then we'll go for the specific issues. Section 8.1 talks about disqualification in case of violation of certain or committing certain crimes, like crimes under Protection of National Honor Act 1971, etc., or it also deals with certain offences like dowry, sati. In case any person, it is any person, not any candidate, or any person who wants to contest elections and he is convicted in these crimes, he or she will be disqualified for 6 years from the date of conviction. He or she cannot contest election. I have mentioned this contesting or not contesting election in Parliament Anti-Defection Law, if you remember clearly. And Section 8.2 talks about disqualification in other offences like Prevention of National Honor Act. That is also 6 years. Okay, I'm sorry. In 8.1 it did mention of national honor. It is only the offences like, say, heinous offences like dowry, sati. In the 8.2 it is offences like Prevention of National Honor under Protection of National Honor Act 1971. Once under this also there is 6 years of punishment from the date of conviction. So 8.1, 8.2 are related to persons. 8.3 and 8.4 are related to person who is an MP or MLA already. So an MP or MLA who is involved in corruption, who is convicted under laws like Prevention of Corruption Act, he will be sent to and is jailed for 2 years or more. He or she will be disqualified for 6 years. Now, this has been in news with respect to the Sikkim Chief Minister PS Gole, who was convicted under this, and he has undergone imprisonment of a year, and he was ineligible for contesting for 6 years, but he has been appointed as the CM. That issue we'll be looking at separately. Now, Section 8.4 deals with MPs and MLAs and MLCs again who have been convicted, and there is a special provision made for them. It says that even if they are convicted in higher courts they will not be immediately disqualified. They will be given time to appeal. So within 3 months of the date of the judgment to the trial court, they are given the time period to appeal. So when their appeal lies with the other court, with the higher court, so in such a case, they will not be eligible for disqualification. And you know how the system works in judiciary, because the case, once it remains pending in Supreme Court, it takes years to solve those issues. Now, so it will in fact lead to his completion of the term as an MP or MLA. So this was considered to be violative of Article 14, and in 2013, in a specific case called Lily Thomas case, it was declared invalid and said that it was violating Article 14. So now this section no longer exists. Now I'm more concerned with 8.3 and some judgments given by Supreme Court. Now 8.3 I'll come to later. What are the judgments given by Supreme Court in the context of criminalization of politics? One of the recent cases was related to Section 123.3 of RPA. Now under under 123.3 of RP, what does it say? Candidate cannot appeal to his voters on the basis of community, religion, caste. Now, under a specific case called Abhiram Singh versus C.D. Comachan case, this case is an older case of 1990s, which was rather than saying famous, it was infamous for giving certain controversial judgments where it said that Hinduism is a way of life, which was later on retracted. So this case was dealing with that issue, and under this case, it was determining what is the meaning of his. Who does it refer to? Does it refer to the candidate or does it refer to the voters? Now, in this case, under CD Convention 2017 case, it said that his refers to the voters. So when it refers to the voters, it is clearly segregating religion and politics, or it is clearly segregating identity and politics. So had it been to the candidate, and suppose I am the candidate and I belong to SC, so if his belongs to candidate, then in that case I can appeal to voters on grounds on grounds of identity other than SC. But now with his belonging to voters, you cannot go for identity politics. This is considered as one of the fundamentals in separating, or one of the fundamental judgments in separating identity and politics. And also it was crucial in avoiding criminalization or curbing criminalization of politics. And there was one more recent judgment wherein Supreme Court gave a judgment recently in 2020 regarding criminalization of politics, and asked political parties to publish the criminal background, criminal antecedents, etc. So we look at the history a bit. Where did this judgment come from, and what are the other mechanisms of controlling or curbing criminalization of politics? Now, if you look at criminalization of politics, one of the methods of curbing was that there was the mechanism called right to know about the candidate. Under right to know about the candidate, every candidate, while filing nomination papers, has to declare three things. One is education qualification, second is assets and liabilities, third is criminal antecedents, if any. Now, criminal antecedents, if any, was to curb criminalization of politics. Now, this was not working very effectively, and in 2018, there was a judgment given by the Supreme Court, which it said that every political party should publish the criminal background of the candidates or their candidates in newspapers and social media in 2018, in a case called Public Interest Foundation versus Union of India. This was blatantly violated. No party followed it, and hence this, regarding the same case, Ashwini Upadhyay Ashwini Upadhyay filed a case regarding the same judgment in 2020, and as a result, Supreme Court invoked in this case in 2020 under Article 129 and 142. Both I've mentioned in one case in one of the videos. 129 and 142 relate to the contempt powers of the Supreme Court. Passing orders is to do complete justice. 129 is court of record. So under this, contempt powers of Supreme Court are outlined. Under this, it issued certain orders. What is the order talk about? It mandates every political party to upload on the website detailed information regarding individuals with pending criminal cases. It shall also include the nature of their offences, charges framed against them. Additionally, political parties need to offer an explanation as to why candidates with pending criminal cases are selected as candidates. So this undercuts the principle that mere winnability at the polls cannot be a factor for choosing a candidate. The above information needs to be published in local as well as national newspaper, as well as parties' social media handles. And criminalization of politics and criminal cases also became important in the context of Devendra Fadnavis, the ex-CM of Maharashtra, wherein he did not disclose his cases where cognizance of the cases were taken. So he made an argument saying that cases whose cognizance has been taken need not be declared under his nomination papers. But you have to remember that whether cognizance is taken by the court or not taken by the court, you have to that does not matter. So once a case has been filed, then a charge sheet has been filed. In that case, it has to be made part of your nomination papers. And also, what is the further judgment it speaks about? That was a digression. Just remember that fact, and I've given it to you. So cognizable word is important. That point you have to remember. So what it further goes on to say with respect to political parties, the information mandatorily has to be published within 48 hours of selection of candidates, or less than 2 weeks before the first date for filing of nominations, whichever is earlier. And political parties, once they submit this report, they have to submit compliance report that they have complied with the orders with the Election Commission of India within 72 hours. If they do not do so, this will attract contempt, is what the court says. So it has made the order stricter. Now, finally, one more issue has been in news recently with called Section 11 of RPA. Now, this has been in news in the context of Sikkim Chief Minister. What is what has been done under Section 11? Section 11 gives the authority to Election Commission of India to reduce the period of disqualification. So this is removal or reduction of period of disqualification. The Election Commission may, for reasons to be recorded, remove any disqualification under Chapter 1, that is Section 812, except under Section 8A. Section 8A deals with your filing of expenses, under which if you don't file, you'll attract disqualification. Except that section, you can reduce. If ECI feels with logical reasons to be recorded, it can reduce. So what it has done recently, that PS Gole, the Sikkim Chief Minister, associated with the ruling party, both at the center and the state, he was convicted under Prevention of Corruption Act under a specific case. In 1996-97, when he was the Animal Husbandry Minister, he was involved in corruption in procurement of milk cows, and after this, the case went to the High Court. Then the judgment was given, and also it was upheld in Supreme Court. So finally he had to undergo imprisonment for that for a year, that is from 2017 to 2018 August 10, and he was released on August 10. So under Section 8.3, it is clearly written that any person who has been convicted under Prevention of Corruption Act for not less than 2 years, the disqualification is for 6 years from the date of release. So he had to be disqualified from 2018 to 2024, but he was not disqualified. He was appointed as the CM, and consequently Election Commission of India gave the reasons that his disqualification process or his disqualification has been removed under Section 11. Now, was this right? How was it correct, etc.? Now, what are the arguments given by CM of Sikkim? He says that the clause Section 8.3, that is Prevention of Corruption Act clause, was added later. That was, it was added in 2002 to 1951. The crime which he had committed was committed in 96. That is 96-97. So he is not eligible, or that rule or clause does not apply to him. It's a silly reason, because though it was added in 2002, his trial, etc., everything happened, and his punishment happened in 2018. So it is applied today. Second thing is, he also goes on to say that the clause which was added, that is 8.3 clause, the Prevention of Corruption Act proviso which was added, that has been repealed recently in Repealing and Amendment Act 2015. Now this is a process which has been done recently. This is a process which has been conducted by the government recently. Repealing and Amendment Act is to remove all redundant laws. When the number of laws increase, the consolidation becomes difficult. So it has removed redundant laws, so redundant clauses. So the Amendment Act is not a new act. So when it is removing the Amendment Act, it is not changing the act. The clause has already been added to the act. So it is not repealing RPA Act in itself. It is not repealing Section 8.3. It is repealing just the Amendment Act, and repealing Amendment Act does not change the original act. And even if you repeal that particular act, it is just symbolic in nature to reduce the number of laws. So it's a very silly, it's an inane argument which is being given. And also, when Election Commission has reduced it, it does not give any clear-cut reasons as to why it is being done. And so when it is doing so, you see Election Commission of India is already fighting a perception battle that it is not acting neutrally and impartially, and this adds to that perception again. And also, not just this, it is very rare that you see that you get an exemption under Section 11 for such serious cases, because prevention or corruption is a severe case especially with the public functionaries and also the public servants. So under such cases, it is unreasonable to give such a decision, and this is already challenged in this Supreme Court, it needs to be seen what will be the decision. When you look at the Supreme Court also, if Supreme Court follows its precedent, this will be declared invalid, because such a situation did occur in 2001 also. There was a famous case called B.R. Kapoor versus State of Tamil Nadu. Under this, the same thing happened with Jayalalitha. Jayalalitha was convicted and then she was appointed the CM, same factor, and under that Supreme Court declared the entire appointment invalid, saying that and the lawyers were arguing that appointing a minister is different and a qualification for being a legislator is different. Under the constitution, there is a rule that you can be appointed minister without being a legislator. That argument they were using, and Supreme Court rejected the argument, saying that non-legislature must be one when he is appointed is not debarred from obtaining the membership of legislature, meaning you can be a minister only if you have the qualifications of being a legislator. He must be one who is qualified to stand for the legislature. So by that precedent, this particular case also has to be declared invalid. Next is electronic voting machines. This has been in news because any party which loses has been crying hoarse, and it has also expressed its displeasure and over the functioning of EVMs. But politics aside, and also the idea of whether it is transparent, opaque, etc., that is different. That's a question of means. Certain things with respect to prelims you should be knowing. Now, electronic voting machines, when did they start, what is the process, etc., that you have to be looking into. Electronic voting machines were first used in India in 1982 in a by-election to Parur Assembly constituency of Kerala, and they are used at the national level in 1919 elections partially, and in total in 2004 elections that became a norm. EVMs are manufactured by two central government undertakings. One is Bharat Electronics Limited and Electronics Corporation of India Limited. And an EVM unit consists of two units. One is the ballot unit and the control unit. The ballot unit is the one where the voter uses to cast his vote. Control unit is the one where all the data is stored, which is later on used for, it is under the person or who is at the polling booth, and this is the control unit is basically to record data and count votes later. Next is, normally if you look at in a particular polling station booth, there are generally 1400 votes, and an EVM can record at a max of 3840 votes, and EVM can have the number of candidates which for which elections can be conducted with a single EVM is 64. And under this there is a VVPAT system as well. VVPAT, voter verified paper audit trail, refers to what it's you get, once you cast your vote, you get a approval, or you get a receipt wherein it is printed whether your vote has been cast, and if it has been cast, who it has been cast to. The receipt is, you don't get the receipt. The receipt is then kept locked within the election offices. This is used to match and mismatch, and how that process runs, that we'll be looking into. So there were many criticisms that EVM is non-transparent, opaque, etc. So many parties demanded and filed a petition with the Supreme Court saying that at least 50 polling stations, in 50 polling stations, 50% of the polling stations, the VVPAT should be matched with the EVM votes completely. But Supreme Court rejected this, because even if you do 50% matching, it would be as good as using a ballot paper. So earlier it was one random polling station would be matched. In case there was a discrepancy in that, then they would go for others and other matching as well. But now, when the parties were demanding for 50%, Supreme Court did not completely agree. It increased the number of polling stations from 1 to 5. So it will be checked in 5 stations, 5 randomly selected polling stations, and in case if there is a discrepancy, then the VVPAT should be counted in the entire constituency. So that is how the entire process is today. So 5, you have to remember, this could be a prelims question. Now, with respect to the ink which is being used today, that is the indelible ink, and recently there was a proposal of invisible ink also, because indelible ink, that ink which is indelible, it is also exported to other countries, and many countries have expressed displeasure with that indelible ink because it seems odd for them. So keeping that in mind, National Physical Laboratory has created an indelible ink. I mean, this is still under the research process. It will take a bit more time if at all it is commercialized and brought into the made part of the election system, to be made part of the election system. Now, the invisible ink works on the principle of luminescence, wherein it will glow a bright orange when a low intensity beam of ultraviolet is shown on it. So NPL prepared the invisible ink as a part of pilot project. It was mooted by the Mysore Paints and Varnish Limited. This company it's a Karnataka government company. It today produces the indelible ink. It is producing it since 1962. It has the monopoly. No one else can manufacture it. And it's a major supplier to Election Commission of India. It also exports the indelible ink to other countries, which I did make a mention. So the new one which is also a project of the same company. NPL is doing that project, and it works on the principle of fluorescence. Next is certain points regarding NPL also. NPL has been in news for many reasons, and also Vikram Sarabhai was also in this. He was instrumental in establishing NPL. So NPL is a National Physical Laboratory. It's a laboratory of CSIR, and it is situated in New Delhi. It's a measurement standards laboratory of India. It maintains all the standards of SI units in India, and it is the body which calibrates the national standards of weights and measures. National Physical Laboratory was conceptualized in 1943 by the governing body of CSIR, and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the then Prime Minister of India, was instrumental. Along with him, Vikram Sarabhai was also instrumental in laying its foundation in 1947. So these are the points you should be knowing. Next is SWEEP. SWEEP is a program or a kind of initiative started by Election Commission of India to ensure more voter participation. Now, voter participation can be done in many ways. Like, there could be negative ways of ensuring voter participation by making voting compulsory, but in a democratic country like India, it does not work. Penalizing for not voting is not a right method, at least in a democratic country. Now, this is one method, or Nota is also other method to ensure voting. So SWEEP was a initiative by Election Commission of India, systematic voters education and electoral participation. So it was launched to inform, educate, motivate and facilitate voters. In SWEEP, every aspect of election process is simulated to ensure that voters participate and they know about the entire electoral process. So this was basically kept in mind to attract a greater participation of youth and women. It began in 2014 from Bihar. Now, there are under this ECI collaborates with many other organizations, NGOs, media, etc. There are many components of it. Just you can look at the component. Generally, they won't be asking those specific components, but generally SWEEP could be asked what exactly it is. Next is election petition. Now, in elections, there will be possibilities of conflicts, questions of qualification, disqualification. So in such questions like MLA and MP's questions, it is dealt by the high courts. In case of presidential and the vice president election, it is dealt by the Supreme Court. So any issue or any form of challenge which you are making to a candidature, it should be done through an election petition. And the term election petition is important. It is not an ordinary civil suit. So when you file an election petition, you are challenging the candidate. So it could be one of the voters of the constituency who is challenging the candidature, or one of the candidates who challenging the other candidate. So either the candidate or the voters of the constituent electorate can challenge it. So when you file an election petition, it is different from ordinary civil suit, because election petitions are considered or treated as a contest in which whole constituency is involved. So it deals with, so it is somewhere between a civil and a criminal case, a larger society. In election petition, the constituency is being represented, its interests are being represented. In a civil case, it's a private parties are involved, individuals are involved. Now, election petitions are tried by the High Court, that I've already mentioned. And when do you file? What is the time period? In case of MPs and MLAs, it is within 45 days from the date of declaration of results. And this entire process is governed under section 80 and section 80A of RP. Next is, what is the process? If you look at if you look at the disqualification process, there are 3 levels of disqualification. One is the High Court which is disqualifying. Disqualification can also occur on the grounds written in the Constitution, or also grounds written in RP. There are various grounds, and once the inquiry happens, once the judgment is given, ECI recommends it to the President. The President approves gives a order of his disqualification. This is the entire process which you should be knowing. Next is opinion poll and exit poll. This is not a recent news, but it makes news whenever there are elections. Now, what are opinion polls and exit polls? Opinion poll refers to poll before the voting or polling. Exit polls refer to surveys conducted after the voting. Now, there are certain rules and regulations as to when opinion polls and exit polls should be stopped, because they will be influencing the public opinion. So in case of opinion poll, there is no specific provision under RP. So ECI, Election Commission of India, has made a regulation. There is nothing written in RP. That point you have to remember. Election Commission has made a rule that it should be stopped 48 hours before the polling. And with respect to exit polls, there is a ban under section 126A of RPA, which says that until all the phases of polling are completed, that is half an hour after the closing of the final phase of the poll, till then exit polls are not allowed. Next is, recent times there is influencing of opinions through social media as well, and so social media is also brought under the idea of exit polls. So section 126(1) of RPA 1951, it bars all TV, radio channels, websites, social media platforms, etc. to broadcast any kind of polls or surveys 48-hour period before the end of the polls in each phase. So these are the points you should be remembering with respect to regulating media and social media. Finally, C-Vigil app. Despite all kinds of rules, etc., violations do happen. So tracking of violations becomes important, and in this the active role of the citizen is very important. In case he sees any malpractices, etc., he should be active in terms of informing the Election Commission of India to facilitate a digitized method of filing complaints or bringing to the notice of Election Commission of India. This app was created. So this app was launched by to report any kind by Election Commission of India, to report any kind of violation of model code of conduct, and the app facilitates sharing of geotag, photographic and video evidence. So if you have any evidence of malpractice occurring, you can upload the photographs and videos as evidence. So the process of taking actions becomes faster. With this, we have understood all the topics related to election and electoral reforms, and just go through once the 20 proposals of Election Commission of India. I have made a mention at different times, like Election Commission of India is demanding its own secretariat, right to, getting bribed, also make it as a cognizable offense, etc., state funding. So all those are proposals under the 20 proposals. Just go through them, because UPSC usually picks questions from report or proposals and then makes it into a question. Coming to the final part, the penultimate part, the questions related to the topic, in which I've attached 2 questions. These questions are also posted in the comment section. Do answer them, because it is not only an assessment of how much of the videos you are understanding, it's also an assessment for us as to how the videos are being received. The first, and also based on your responses, we are thinking of giving a full-fledged current affairs paper after finishing a sizable chunk. So first question is related to EVM, second is related to bribery and voting. Now coming to the final part, how do I minimize negatives in negative marks in prelims? I told that one of the students had raised this question. So what you should be doing, or what are the things you should be remembering in order to avoid negative marks? Now there are certain clinical steps I'll be giving you as to what should be the ideas, or what should be the thinking which you should develop in order to avoid negative marking. First is, remember that prelims is not about ranking, but it is just about qualifying. So do not aim for, like, it's not like you are aiming for 130 marks, 140 marks, because you're not getting a rank here. All you're getting is, I mean, you have to qualify. So why am I saying this? Because I've seen many students with an overzeal, they go for an overkill, and in to just to just get more marks, they go for more number of questions, and they go, I mean, there will be higher probabilities of going wrong. So if you know things, then it is good, and do not solve the questions, or do not attempt questions just for increasing the number of marks. That is the first thing you should be remembering. Second is, see, the probability of getting negative marks goes on decreasing with the kind of preparation you are doing. In case your preparation is strong, the likeliness of negative marks decreases. Now, when I say preparation is strong, what do I understand by it? I mean two things by it. The first part I'm discussing now. Prepare in such a fashion that it creates less situations of confusion in the exam. So when I say less situations of confusion, what does it mean? Have you ever felt like, I mean, most students feel that whenever they solve a question, they are confused in the first and the second option. They feel that I have read that, but I'm not able to recall. This happens precisely because their revision methods, they have not revised either, or their revision methods are incorrect. And I've talked at length regarding how do you revise a particular thing. I told you, close your book and revise. Second is, fix 2 hours for your revision every day, irrespective of whether you like it or not, because revision is a boring it's a boring process. So many people do not do it. So irrespective of whether you like it or not, you have no option. So more revisions, and also revising at the right time. When I have also talked about when do you have to revise and what is the method of revision, also have clinically discussed in my earlier videos. And more importantly, when you are revising, what should be the aim of revising? You should be aiming in such a fashion that I will be attempting, or I will be knowing 40 to 50 questions, the answer to 40 to 50 questions, without even reading the options. If you have that level of confidence and that kind of a preparation, negative marks will significantly decrease. And more importantly, I'm giving you one more idea. Rather than reading too many things haphazardly, even if you read a smaller chunk, a smaller portion of the syllabus repeatedly, your probabilities of being correct becomes more in the exam. So even if you know, instead of knowing 60 or 70 questions perfectly without giving options, even if you know 30 questions without giving options, that will actually make you safer and safer. And less and gives you a probability of lesser negative marks. So first thing is, that's what I said, your study, the method of preparation should be with such you should make such confident preparation that you should not be relying much on the options. I mean, yes, some options help you in doing away, but your aim should be that when you aim for the sky, somewhere you reach for the tree. Next is the most important thing is, cover your syllabus properly. Many times what happens is, students face a problem because some questions just become bounces for them. That precisely happens because they have not covered the syllabus. When I say syllabus means what? I mean main syllabus rather than prelim syllabus. And I've talked about this in my earlier videos also, that there are certain blind spots, like people don't prepare internal security, people don't prepare agriculture, people don't prepare society, people don't prepare. So prepare the prelims aspects of society, prepare the prelims aspect. You will get a broader idea of what these blind spots. So once you know these blind spots well, your 15 to 20 questions are in your kitty. So if your preparation is if you follow these two things, that is, one, your revision methods are proper. Second is, cover your syllabus properly, address your blind spots properly, it will significantly reduce your negatives. So better the knowledge, or lesser the probability of going for negative marks. So this is at the level of preparation. Now finally, in the exam hall, how do you reduce the negative markings? So there are two things which you should be doing when you solve the exam paper, or when you enter the exam hall. When you look at the paper, first thing is, you have to assess what is the level of toughness of the paper. Now, how do you understand the level of toughness? A candidate who knows the syllabus of UPSC very well, he will be able to assess or make a judgment about the paper. So if you look at paper last year and the year previous to it, in the year previous to it was slightly difficult compared to last year. So how do you make that assessment? That comes through your reading of syllabus. When you know the entire syllabus and when you have made that preparation which I told you, repeated revision, covering all your blind spots, even then if you feel the paper is difficult, then it is difficult for everybody. If it is lesser difficult, then you should be happy. So if it is difficult for everybody, because you are a standard candidate, because you know the entire syllabus, so by that judgment, if it is difficult for you, it is going to be difficult for everybody. So you will be getting a right assessment of how difficult the paper is and how less difficult less difficult the paper is. Once you know that, slightly assess as to or make a ballpark assessment of how many, what could be the likely cutoff. You need not necessarily be accurate in you could take a range 100 to 5 could be. If it is tough, it could be around 100. So depending on that, look at the number of questions you should be solving. Make a judgment. Okay, this is the number of questions I'm going to solve. So when you make all these scientific calculations, then you'll come to a figure. Okay, in this paper, I should go for 70 or I should go for 80, because it depends. You cannot go with a determined mindset unless you see the paper. Once you see the paper, you'll get to know, okay, this is the standard of the paper. These many questions I have to attempt to pass this. So if suppose there is 70 questions. Now 70 questions is what if you have considered as the number of questions you have to get correct. So 70 questions is what you have to attempt. In that case, how do you start solving the paper? You have to solve the paper in rounds. Now when you're attempting 70 questions, it is not necessary that you know all the 70 questions. So what you have to do is first attempt those questions where you know 100%. In the second round, go for questions where you know 75%. In the third round, go for questions where you know 50%. So with this, what happens, your likeliness of negative marking is scientifically assessed. How? First, suppose in the first round, since your preparation is very well, if you go according to the preparation or according to the guidelines which I have given, you'll be likely to you'll be in the position to solve around 40 to 45 questions in the very first attempt. So all you have to manage is around 20-25 questions. So you have to take more guesses in the second round, and the third round, that is the 50% round, take lesser number of guesses and reach somewhere that ideal figure of 70 which you want to. And if you follow this clinical method, it really works, that negative mark. So don't blindly go with, okay, I'll be doing 90 questions, I'll be doing 100 questions. It depends on the day. If it is easier, then the cutoff will be higher. The number of questions you're going to attempt is also higher. So determine on that particular day itself. Hope the solution which I'm giving helps you. And also, if you feel that you still need a clarity on this particular subject or this particular topic, you can write to me. My mail ID is manjunath.manifestis@gmail.com. And now with this video, I have completed all the 25 videos of polity series, and this ends our first part of polity, the first leg of polity. And what is when I say first leg, naturally there has to be a second leg of polity. There is a second leg of the entire current affairs which will start once we finish the first leg. It will be somewhere 15 days prior to the exam, whenever the exam could be. And in that, what we will be covering from March to the day, 10 days prior to your exam. In case the exam postpones also, we'll be covering from March to whatever month it is. So this we are doing particularly because students face a difficulty in doing newspapers during this time period, because they are more into reading static, etc. So keeping that in mind, we'll be dealing with all the issues completely from March to May. You need not worry about that. And in the next league, after this, it will be budget and economic survey, then history will be taken up, and I'll be coming back with society and society related issues, and it'll also be giving you a video on how society issues or society as a subject should be understood with respect to prelims. Thank you for watching this video. Hope it helped. Have a great day.